Hamas has informed international mediators of its approval of the proposed ceasefire agreement with its political bureau head Ismail Haniyeh, holding discussions with Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al-Thani and Egypt's Intelligence Director Abbas Kamel to convey the approval. Following 2 days of talks in Cairo regarding ending the Gaza conflict and prisoner exchanges, the Hamas delegation returned to Qatar to consult with the movement's leadership. The focus now shifts to the response from the Zionist part, with details of the Palestinian side steps and the timing of the agreement's implementation being crucial. Tonight's coverage will delve into these questions and others as Hamas agrees to the ceasefire proposal brokered by Egypt and Qatar, aiming to halt the Zionist aggression in the Gaza Strip amidst escalating violence and displacement in Rafah, drawing international concern and condemnation. Stay tuned, the details are right after the break. Hello and welcome to tonight's special coverage, streaming to you live on All 24 News. I'm your host, Kirifa Zachary, and before we bring in our guest, here are the latest updates. Hamas has announced its approval of the Egyptian-Qatari proposal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The movement's political bureau had made a phone call to the Qatari Prime Minister and the Egyptian Minister of Intelligence to convey Hamas's approval of the ceasefire agreement proposal.
نسمح له بتحقيقها.
Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political bureau of Hamas, made a phone call to the Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al-Thani and to the Egyptian Minister of Intelligence Abbas Kamel, informing them of Hamas' approval of their proposal regarding the ceasefire agreement on Monday.
The Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement Hamas has announced the dispatch of a new delegation to Cairo today, Tuesday, to finalize discussions concerning the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. This step is characterized as part of Hamas's positive response to the ceasefire proposal, demonstrating the movement's leadership's willingness to engage in constructive dialogue.
The positive approach taken by the movement's leadership toward the recent ceasefire proposal it received is indicative of the attitude it will maintain in Cairo to secure an agreement. Following recent exchanges with mediators in Egypt and Qatar, a delegation from the movement will travel to Cairo on Tuesday to further engage in discussions.
Hamas has confirmed its commitment to achieving an agreement that will halt Zionist aggression entirely, according to the movement's statement. The Qatari-Egyptian proposal includes provisions such as the withdrawal of occupation forces, the return of displaced individuals, relief measures for the Palestinian people, the initiation of reconstruction efforts, and the implementation of a comprehensive exchange deal.
Hamas and the Palestinian resistance forces are determined to make sure the agreement in a way that fulfills the demand of our people for a complete cessation of aggression, withdrawal of occupation forces, return of refugees, relief for people, initiation of reconstruction, and the accomplishment of a serious exchange deal.
Meanwhile, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has welcomed the announcement of the successful efforts by Egypt and Qatar to secure a ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip. According to the Palestinian news agency, President Abbas emphasized the importance of the international community exerting pressure on the Zionist entity to adhere to this agreement and to continue efforts aimed at ending the occupation of all Palestinian lands. And on the occasion, large crowds flooded the streets of Rafah, south of the Gaza Strip, on Monday, celebrating Hamas's approval of the truce proposal. Palestinians expressed their support for the resistance, chanting slogans and firing into the air in jubilation. A similar atmosphere of joy was witnessed in Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip, with hundreds taken to the streets to celebrate.
I can't describe to you my joy. We left Gaza, my children, my girls have been moved around, living the life of tents, and today we bid farewell to the tents. I thank everyone who stood with me and I thank everyone who stood with Palestine. God is with us.
الآن تم إعلان وقف إطلاق النار من قبل الوفد المفاوض.
Today, the announcement of a ceasefire deal from the negotiating delegation has taken place. I personally am not happy at all. The happiness is lacking. We've only just started to feel secure.
شهداء حنبدأ نعزي حنبدأ
We will go home as families of martyrs, we will mourn, we will go back to a new war, an economic war, a war in education, the war of the people we have lost, the war of our homes that we've lost. No one is happy. These are all feelings beyond our control. We're happy that we will go back to feeling secure. This is happiness that is lacking.
All right, let's bring in our guest now. Joining me live from USA is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, an Associate Dean of International Education at California State University from California. And from UK is Mr. Ken O'Keefe, author, human rights activist from London. Let me kick it off with you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. So technically here we're hearing about this news that Hamas is informing the international mediators of its acceptance of the mediators' proposal. What exactly did Hamas agree to here in the amended ceasefire proposal for Gaza?
Thank you, Karim, and it's a pleasure to be with O'Keefe as
Pleasure is
well.
all.
Basically, really, Hamas get what it has asked for a long time ago. It has made it a condition of full withdrawal, a reconstruction of Rafah, and cessation, a permanent cessation of hostilities. They got that in 3 phases, which equals to 124 days. During the first phase, where a lot of things are happening, you have a withdrawal from the east part of Gaza. You have also release of detainees, captives. I think 33 women captives during this period. For Palestinian detainees. 30 if they were non-soldiers, 50 if they were soldiers for each release. We also have a second phase where we move to a permanent end of military presence of Israel. So it's in the end, it got what we want. And at one point, the Hamas or the resistance movement was looking for guarantees. This deal is guaranteed by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. Mm-hmm. And it's led by a seasoned diplomat, Burns, who is has a long experience in the region. So this is a good win, and finally, I think the Palestinians have something to celebrate for, and began a peaceful life, hopefully, very soon.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope so. Mr. Ken O'Keefe, do you agree with what Dr. Salhi was just saying? And what are the main factors influencing Hamas's decision, according to you, to accept the amended ceasefire proposal for Gaza?
Yes, I certainly agree that this is not a departure from any of the demands of Hamas before this. And when we look at the actual context of how we got to this place, it really does beg the question, did the creation of the Jewish state of Israel have any lawful basis at all? And was there ever any intention to share any of the land, of the Holy Land, with the Palestinians or the inhabitants? What Israel has been wanting from day one has now been manifested in the form of the genocide that we see playing out. And the aggression and the violence that we see, it really is only comparable to the Bolshevik Revolution which ironically has roots to the very people in Israel today. So anyway, the end goal would be a just ceasefire that would be immediate. I think no sane person, it's Israel alone that stands wanting to continue the violence. We all know that there is no chance of eliminating Hamas. If anything, Hamas is stronger today. Despite whatever losses in troops, they are stronger in terms of international support and in terms of raising awareness. It was a Hamas action that initiated this bloodshed in the eyes of Israel, but it is actually genocidal policy of the creation of the Jewish state, which was an apartheid state from day one. So at the end of the day, this really is only a step towards the ultimate justice, which would be to discuss the creation of the state, its entire existence, and its end goal of genocide. Because let's make no mistake about it, there was never any two-state solution, really. Mm-hmm. It was always intended to genocide. Right now, a ceasefire, I think everyone can agree, is necessary. Mm-hmm. But it's only...
Mm-hmm. Understood. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, still, despite all this harshness and, of course, the resolve of the resistance wanting to continue through this war, just to prove a point, but people, let's say, were surprised to see there was some kind of flexibility in accepting the amended details seen as maybe significant step towards ending the aggression and easing Palestinian suffering. How do you comment about that?
It is a result of multiple factors. I think this flexibility is shown in terms of orchestrating the deal. Mm-hmm. It's understood from Hamas that the 124 days could be long, or so there was some flexibility on that. But it's also flexibility based on principles. In other words, Hamas is willing and has, as its leaders have said on many occasions, that they don't want to take any deal, but they're also concerned about the suffering of the Palestinians. Now, that is very, very important. But it also the result of showing flexibility from the strength. They are not weak to be flexible, but rather they are strong enough and confident enough to reach a deal based on what they have seen, on what they had achieved, the armed resistance. So that's a huge thing. Then the other thing, when you look at it in perspective, this has been a bad week for the Israelis. You have a major defeat on American campuses. Where you have all this huge demonstration that speaks volume to the failure of the Israeli lobby, the organization like Canary Mission, organization like Campus in coalition with Israel. These are major organizations that have been lobbied for Israel for so many decades on campuses. That is also shown a huge failure. So Hamas is very, very keen on achieving a deal that will not be at expense of the Palestinian rights, but flexible, have shown flexibility from the strength. In a way, what they had in mind all the time, and the leaders have said it number of occasions, that they are concerned and they look for any ways to ease the pain of the Palestinians. And I think that's where that flexibility comes from.
Very good. A similar question, perhaps, Mr. Kanoukief. What kind of assurances do you think Hamas movement actually did secure before expressing approval to this ceasefire?
Yes, well, in order to answer that question, we must understand historically the actions of the Arab states that are mediating. Mm-hmm. It's fair to say, by any sensible look at history, that none of the Arab nations have done anything significantly to help and facilitate any kind of just remedy to this whole endeavor. If anything, there has been deep collaboration with the other Arab states, specifically Egypt, which is blockading Gaza to this day. It's not an Israeli blockade, it's an Israeli-Egyptian blockade. So I believe that the leaders of these other Arab nations are feeling the pressure because, ironically, the consciousness of my birth nation in America being reflected by the young people, which I'm inspired by the young people. They're the ones having to teach us old folks that this is unacceptable. A world that allows such impunity to continue is a world tempting World War III and total self-destruction. So the Arab leaders are feeling the pressure, and it is really creating an awareness that is going to lead to a better place on the back end of this suffering if we use this momentum of awareness to understand the roots of this conflict and the end goals of what we should be looking for and apply the law. The law is very clear. We do have remedy. And by the way, it's really important to note this blockade. I lived in Gaza as far back as 16 years ago. The blockade in 2008 was hideous. Really, for those that don't understand what it is when they go to get water and it's just sitting there, when you don't have clean drinking water, when you don't have basic food, you don't have the ability to provide for income, and when you're forced to live on aid, literally a father having to take aid to feed his own children, and you can't protect your children because of a blockade that all the Western nations have facilitated and protected, all of them. So this really begs the question, who is in charge of our world? Who? Why is it that a little tiny state in the Middle East called Israel has this extraordinary capacity to get all of the rest of the world, in the West in particular, to go lockstep in line, and all of our politicians who democratically represent us are facilitating this genocide? And it's only the consciousness of humanity that is forcing the U.S. government, which is a disgraceful, treasonous body of government, to actually start and say, oh, we're looking at a ceasefire. Before that, they did everything, including the weapons being delivered, hand-delivered, so that we can drop more 2,000-pound bombs on a defenseless people that's locked in the biggest concentration camp in the world. This is all being exposed. God bless the Palestinians and the resistance for getting us all to realize this. And God, please help the Palestinians. This sacrifice that they are making, the descendants of Jesus, is an example of humanity. God bless the Palestinians. They're the ones that are winning this fight by their sacrifice.
Dr. Hamoud Salhi, in light of the comments of Mr. Kanoukief, do you think that the entity is going actually to react to this ceasefire or respond to the movement perhaps, and we can anticipate some kind of a response soon in perhaps a short time frame, or maybe they're going to linger on and stall and continue whatever they're doing, atrocious crimes, against innocent Palestinians?
In other words, will Israel continue to be itself, delay negotiations, and so on and so forth? We are already seeing that delays. For example, the idea that they said that the deal that Hamas, the Palestinian resistance, signed was not the same as the one they initially saw. And that's really is a lie in itself, because you have the mediators in place. The other thing that they were talking about is that they will not agree to the terms, and they plan on negotiating further and further. So this is a typically Israeli move. But what is very important to notice, and this is where you asked earlier, Karim, about the resistance flexibility. One thing that they made sure that happens, and they delayed the negotiations, remember, for a day or so, is to find guarantors. And the fact that these documents are being approved, sponsored, and got guarantees that the terms of this agreement will be implemented, guarantees from Egypt, Qatar and the United States. There was a suggestion from the resistance to include Turkey because of its role as a NATO force and the relationship that has in the region. There was also some discussion about Iran, including Iran, for different reasons. All of those, that's what got the resistance. And I think the resistance learned lesson from the past. This idea of negotiating for the sake of negotiating. That's why when you read the agreement and you look at the details in it, they were very specific. There is a time and place when things happen. When the withdrawal began, split into 3 periods. 124 days, as I said earlier. There was some specific. This is to speak to the mind of the Israelis. In other words, what the resistance, Palestinian resistance, understood is that they are very, very much capable of acting or playing as if they were the occupier here. So they learned lessons from, what takes by force has to be taken by force. Israel doesn't understand this peaceful mind. They renegotiate the terms. If you are general, as we've seen some statements that made by several Arab leaders, the Israelis use it to their advantage. All of this boils down to the idea that I think the beginning of the implementation will be soon. And I think it's a matter of days. And the reason for this is that what we've seen in the last few days with this adoption of Gaza becoming an international movement, solidarity for Gaza. We have all this demonstration all over the globe for Gaza. The fact also that polls suggest, this is a recent one, I think led by Harvard Institute of Politics or something, I might be mistaken by the name, but it's a Harvard poll, where they found that 51% of the American youth, or those who interviewed, support Palestine, and that over a large number of the youth now is more sympathetic. I think 38% versus 13 are sympathetic to Israel. These are polls that suggest a lot. And finally, donors, which for a while we thought they did not care that much about what's happening in Gaza. Recent trend are showing that even donors contributing, this is large donors contributing to Biden's campaign, are now we're sort of demanding or asking Biden to stop the war. So those are the effects that sort of would force the United States to put more pressure on Israel so it can get hold of, it can come to terms with this agreement and start implementing them. And that's why it's on the one hand, we have to look at the history of how the Israelis have behaved in the past, which at the same time the resistance have understood and use it to its own advantage by setting a plan that would put Israel right in the front now, where the world is telling now, you told us Hamas was the problem, when Hamas is saying, yes, we accept the deal. What's your deal now? So that's also another factor that we have to consider, that Netanyahu will have to face, that his domestic audience would also force him to do so. So hopefully, Karim, to give you a short answer, hopefully it will be in few days, and I'm confident this will be the implementation will start soon.
Let's hope so. And Mr. Kanoukief, we have seen with Dr. Hamoud Salhi, who went through a lot of details and specifics regarding some aspects that the entity might actually refuse. And here, I mean, Netanyahu in particular, this kind of proposal or deal, ceasefire deal, could run counter to Netanyahu's desired continuation of this aggression. So Hamas' acceptance of the amended paper will heighten the pressure on the leaders of this entity in general. So according to you, how does this dynamic unfold?
Well, it's an open secret at this point that Netanyahu has no political interest at all in any kind of ceasefire. We all know that he's going to be out of office the moment this ends, and even maybe before it ends, because his popularity, his corruption is a well-known fact. But it's important to note that the Netanyahus are easily replaceable. And in fact, the whole of the U.S., the U.S. largely in the past, but the Israeli population, if we look at the polls, 75% plus want genocide. They absolutely do. But the only little caveat to that is that you've got the so-called hostages, which are actually technically prisoners of war. The prisoners of war are very big bargaining chips for the families to get a ceasefire. And in fact, we see that, as you saw in your reporting, the protests in Israel are making clear that not only do they not favor Netanyahu, but they want a ceasefire if it brings their people home. Now, when this happens, because I agree with the other guests that this is going to happen and sooner rather than later, because this madness is only weakening Israel. At this point now, its arrogance, its hubris is so destructive for its own purposes that every day this continues is one day closer to the end of Israel. And I'm going to say it again, Israel is done. The creation of the Jewish state was unlawful. It was based on genocide. It never had any interest other than genocide. And it was the United Nations' first act to create this state without any consent of the people. None of this should have been done in the first place. And it really is, right now, we're talking ceasefire. That's necessary. The blockade needs to end. But here's what our positive obligations are as citizens in Western nations and Turkey, which plays a key role. Turkey could cut off oil and gas supplies right now. This would shut down Israel like that. Why is Turkey not doing that? It's a Muslim nation. Its population overwhelmingly is against this genocide, and yet they continue to trade. How about all of our Western nations that continue to do trade, not only in weapons, but also in technology, agriculture, electronics, and computing IT? All of this translates tens of billions of dollars of trade between the EU and Israel. This needs to stop. This is exactly what we did with Russia, did we not? Based on a lot of lies, because Russia had a real, genuine threat to its security with all of the policies and dirty business in Ukraine. But we've cut off Russia, we've cut off Iran, we cut off Iraq, we cut off Libya, we've cut off Syria. Look at all of these countries that are hurting other than Russia. All of them have been hurt. Even Iran is overcoming the absolute insanity of the economic sanctions. The world needs to sanction the West. Really. We need to be boycotted. And us, the people of the West, need to start looking at lawful tax revolts. These are options. These are options that we have not discussed. And this is why we're in this horrible situation. I believe in lawful, peaceful remedy. And we do have lawful, peaceful remedy. Cut off trade with Israel now. Every nation that is doing trade, especially in weapons, should be charged with accomplice in enabling genocide now. There's no reason, we have the evidence, America first needs to be facing charges in the International Criminal Court for enabling genocide. There is a way, but we as people need to really, really exercise our true power. We outnumber our corrupt politicians. We can demand real change, and we can act in a way that will compel that change. If we do anything less, then we are, in our own way, little or a lot, guilty of allowing this to happen. The world is now at a demarcation point. The old world order needs to give way to a new world order, but not the one they envisioned for us. A new one based on law, on justice, on truth, humanity. And this, once again, is what the Palestinians are teaching the world. They're teaching the world what it is to be human. And boy, did we need that lesson.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mr. Kanouki, for all those insights. Let me just share with you what is happening lately on the ground. 26 Palestinians, including 8 children, were killed in raids by Zionist forces in Rafah, Gaza, Zionist forces demanded the evacuation of eastern areas, prompting thousands to flee westward. Warplanes targeted various areas, causing extensive damage. Let's get more insight with Usama Ayadi now.
Following days of international warnings for the Zionist entity not to make any further assault against the last refuge for Palestinians, Rafah region, yet a massive wave of bombings perpetrated by the Zionist forces took place on Monday.
The Israeli occupation told people to go to Rafah, that is a safe place. Today they are telling us to go out of Rafah. Where will the people go? Where will all these crowds go? 1.5 million or 2 million civilians. Where will they go?
Palestinians seeking shelter in Rafah were priorly cautioned by the entity to evacuate towards the supposedly humanitarian areas. The Zionist military incessantly pounded the region with airstrikes, leaving behind several dead and wounded, columns of smoke, as well as massive piles of rubble.
Last night the situation was very difficult. We woke up to the sound of the bombing and the rubble which reached the tents of the displaced. Even our children and our girls were screaming from fright.
The move is yet another attempt by the Zionist occupation to force Gazans to flee their own land. More than 200,000 people were targeted by the displacement orders, which also affected the Abu Yusuf al-Najjar hospital, Rafah's main hospital, as well as the Rafah crossings.
We are dismantling the tent for the fourth time. We were displaced from the north to Khan Yunis. We are currently in Rafah, facing displacement once again.
Orders of the forced evacuation of hundreds of thousands of civilians did not imply that they would be shielded from the Zionist military attacks. This is especially alarming, given that the great majority of them have already experienced multiple displacements and have nowhere else to go.
And in light of what is happening in Rafah, the Palestinian resistance warned the Zionist forces against invading Rafah, highlighting the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the fate of Palestinian prisoners. Hamas declared the operation would not be easy for the occupation soldiers and urged the international community to intervene to protect civilians.
We affirm that any military operation in Rafah will not be a picnic in the park for the fascist occupation forces, and that our valiant resistance, headed by the Qassam brigades, is fully prepared to defend our people and defeat this enemy, abort his plans and thwart his goals. We call on the international community to take urgent action to stop this crime, which threatens the lives of hundreds of thousands of unarmed civilians, including children, women and elderly. And also we call on humanitarian organizations and bodies, headed by UNRWA, to remain in their places in Rafah and not to leave or bow to the will of the fascist occupation.
International reactions condemned the Zionist occupation's orders to evacuate eastern Rafah as inhumane and violating international humanitarian and human rights law, according to the United Nations. Francesca Albanese, UN reporter for human rights in the Palestinian territories, also warns that a potential Zionist attack on Rafah would constitute a massacre and a direct assault on civilians.
The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continues to warn about the potentially devastating consequences of a ground operation in Rafah. Today's evacuation orders for East Rafah will only worsen the civilians' suffering. They are being instructed to relocate to Al-Masawi, which is already overcrowded and lacking safety and essential humanitarian services. A mass evacuation on this scale is impossible to carry out safely.
UNRWA warned of the devastating impact of a Zionist attack on Rafah, pledging to maintain aid efforts in the area, refusing to participate in forced evacuations. UNRWA emphasized the risk of further displacement, pushing society to its limit and endangering hundreds of thousands of Palestinians.
So we've seen evacuation orders today issued for all of Rafah east of Saladin and then a stretch of neighborhoods just west of Saladin and Rafah. The total population impacted by the evacuation orders is approximately 100,000 people. Our concern, of course, is the 1.4 million people that are in Rafah, many of whom have been displaced multiple times, and almost half of which are children.
Back to you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. So we see perhaps the decision to accept the terms of the ceasefire agreement may not solely lay in the hands of Netanyahu. Maybe there are other influential figures within the entity who also have a say in this matter. But we see this international pressure, and at the same time, these are evacuation orders just being published to the media, and they are distributed to the citizens of Gaza, asking them to evacuate the area. How do you read all this? Do you think that they would actually accept the terms, or they would just continue and go for a ground invasion?
We have to wait. I don't believe there will be a ground invasion for the obvious reason that we moved on. The United States, in particular, moved to another level, which is managing this crisis. The other reason, and I get back to the managing the crisis, how this is unfolding. The other reason is the obvious, that this is also a last attempt to position for Israel to position itself in this sort of what was a negotiation now for the response to the agreement and the delays they are practicing. Let's not forget that Israel has been committing massacres after massacres for a long time now, and nothing has stopped them. So from that perspective, it's also a continuation of what's happening. But I think this is one of the last attempts that Israel will continue to do this. And I mentioned managing the crisis or managing this crisis. I think the United States has moved to this space now, how to turn a bad situation for their own benefits. We've seen this particularly, just to give an example, in 2002, following the second Intifada, when at that time, Intifada has made, the second Intifada has gotten a lot of appeal internationally. The Palestinians were on center stage internationally, and out of the blue, to sort of divert the direction, President George W. Bush comes with the idea in which he calls or he recognizes Palestine as a state, and he put conditions on them. One of them is to renounce terrorism. The other one is what he calls terrorism. The other one is to proceed with political reforms. And so he set conditions for how they would recognize a Palestinian state, which obviously, when the elections happened and Hamas won, Condoleezza came say, you don't have a right to be in the position, and they nullified everything, and they ended the discussion of the new Middle East. So there is precedent for this. So where we are at this point is that in management of that crisis, and we see this, for example, at different level. On the student level, where we have the universities, where you have this demonstration after demonstrations, the United States in general, the Israelis in particular, lost the battle in favor of the students. But where they are active in local state legislation. Today, there are 32 states that have laws that would nullify any boycott, any divestment, any sanction held approved by any institution in their states, including the universities. So the state laws overrule any laws. That's number one. On the federal level, on the Congress level, the Congress just passed another bill making put in a narrow definition of anti-Semitism, which basically relegate to the idea that if a Jewish person feel unsafe because of comments or whatever, and any attack against the Israeli state, all its form would be considered a violation of international law, of American law, and there will be consequences. That's in terms of the campuses. In terms of engaging the international community, we've seen how the administration used its veto against Algeria proposal, the initiatives. They are also recently been very active in stopping the ICC from issuing orders to indict Netanyahu. And in this case, we have to see that they use it to their own advantages. On the ground, you have this whole idea of building a port, and it's basically result into engage in what we call a nation building, the same thing they did in Iraq, they did in Afghanistan. That is in place. And then the last part, which we have to see how this is unfolding, is re-engaging the normalization process. There was a lot of discussions with the Saudis being another state that would sort of join the normalization state. That seems to go nowhere. But there are also discussions about engaging the Palestinian National Authority in this process and seemingly supporting the Palestinian National Authority, despite the fact that the movement, the Palestinians themselves, wants to handle their post-Gaza their own way. It's an internal matter, and everybody has refused that, even though, including the tribal leaders who oppose any division of the fragmentation of Palestine. In other words, we moved. All these are indicators to show that the United States is moving towards managing this crisis, and the risk for this administration is the elections. Coming up, the fear that the Biden administration will lose the White House, will lose the Congress, and they strongly believe that if they resolve the Gaza issue, they will win the election, because they know at that point that the youth, the women who have strong views about Palestine, will also shift their focus toward voting on the basis of issues like abortion and some social educational program, immigration, and so on and so forth. So that's why the United States is in this mode of managing the crisis, and they will put pressure on the Israelis to stop what they're doing because of the cost involved. Do they do it sooner? Now, later? The indication that they will. And I think the test now is in Israel to show whether it wants peace, whether it wants a resolution, whether it wants to be held hostage in the hands of Netanyahu, or if it wants to look at for a way out of this crisis, because certainly they have a lot to lose, and they have lost a lot, including the support of the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Back to you, Mr. Kanoukief. So we have many scenarios here to imagine. And let's suppose that the Zionist entity ultimately rejects the amended agreement proposed by the mediators, and all the pressure exerted by the international powers on the Zionist entity is not going to yield any fruition. Yet again, we know that the United States is the sole country that can, in fact, actually put pressure to the entity so as they resolve the crisis, just like Dr. Hamoud Salhi. But then what other political options would the Hamas movement have in case of a refusal?
Well, resistance. This is the last resort when there is no just remedy, when you have no options. And when you look at the context of the politicians that inhabit my birth nation, the United States, in fact, your other guest is in California, where I was born, the overwhelming majority of all of the representatives of the United States government don't represent the will or the interest of the United States. They represent the will and the interest of the Jewish state of Israel. This is reflected in the policies of the United States, whether it be the vetoes that the United States has provided as a member of the Security Council, dozens of vetoes that would have prevented previous crimes. And because impunity reigns in a system that is rigged, there are so many conversations that we need to have to be able to correct and to be able to solve the problems we face, such as the 5 permanent state member status of the Security Council. That needs to end now. There is no Southern representation, and it took a Southern representative, South Africa, to file a blatantly obvious genocide charge that another Southern nation, Malaysia, they had a tribunal back 11 years ago under Mahathir, God bless him. They found Israel guilty of genocide 11 years ago, and rightfully so. It's all of us in the northern nations, in the West in particular, our governments have been infiltrated. This is the discussion we need to have. Why is it that our governments favor Israel hand over foot? Whether it be the Netherlands, whether it be England, whether it be America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, doesn't matter. Every single one of them. How is that possible? Here is another thing that might reveal or shed some light. Maybe the Epstein scandal and the Mossad operation that oversees Jeffrey Epstein, maybe many of our politicians have been willing participants in the whole bribe scheme that compromises our leaders so that they will do everything Israel wants. We need to start having intelligent conversations about why do our representatives in our democracies represent the interest and will of another nation, such as the dual nationals. Look at America. We literally have a sitting politician in America, in Florida, wearing his IDF uniform proudly. Since when does a representative in a sovereign government have a uniformed military man of another nation bragging about him actually serving this other nation? This conversation has not happened because the filter of, quote, anti-Semitism. The truth has become anti-Semitic in this new Orwellian reality. All of these conversations that we have not had have led to the genocide that we see today and the war crimes of my birth nation in Iraq. Remember the weapons of mass destruction? That was a lie. That was a war for Israel. That was for greater Israel. Iraq was target number one. All of the nations that we've been targeting, Muslim nations surrounding Israel, this is part of greater Israel. But that conversation would be classified as, quote, anti-Semitic. It's the truth is what it is. So this world must change. We must experience a paradigm shift. We must look at the world in a new way, a wise, intelligent, humane way. This is what will compel our leaders to do what they must do according to the law. According to the law. None of these things that we've been doing have been lawful. It has been a might makes right reality with my birth nation, the military industrial complex of my birth nation running roughshod over the world. And all of our Western governments, including much of the populations of the West, similarly to the Israeli population, have sat by and gleefully allowed our nations to do whatever as long as we can have cheap gasoline and go to Walmart and buy a bunch of goodies from China. This is a world that is still going to go to World War III if we don't do what the Palestinians are teaching us right now, what it is to be human. There are many opportunities out of this incredible crime, but if we don't have accountability, the ICJ needs to issue those arrest warrants. Netanyahu, Smotrich, they need to be arrest warrants issued. These are criminals, and they need to be dealt with in a lawful manner as criminals. And let us conduct a lawful, evidence-based trial for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, abductions, you name it. Everything is happening there. Accountability and lawful remedy is an answer. And a lot of prayer. A lot of prayer. The one thing the Palestinians have, they have God. I wouldn't say that about Israel. Does God really endorse what the Jewish state of Israel is doing? Me thinks no.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khan-O'Keefe. And just as we are about to wrap up our special coverage for tonight, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, according to you, how many people are actually getting more and more aware about what is happening in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, and people have actually unmasked this filter of anti-Semitism, as Mr. Khan-O'Keefe was saying? Because personally, I have seen a lot of statements, students during the students' movement who were actually Jews and who were saying that we are here safe in the United States and we need to talk about this issue. We are a Jewish people who are safe in a nation, but we need to address the atrocities that are taking place in Palestine. According to you, how many people are like this?
I think there is a huge shift. Even when we look at the demonstration on campus, what this demonstration in campus brought the issue of freedom of speech. And the question there, why is it a pro-Israel Jewish person is able to impose or be reported and broadcast as a victim who has all the rights, when a pro-Palestine is not. In fact, when a Palestinian is attacked, they are ignored. These are serious issues. So the debate shifted in the United States to freedom of speech in the larger context. On the Israeli side, the debate is also shifting between Jewish as an identity and Jewish as a Zionist with a political identity. And those Jews who are on the campus leading some of the demonstrations and on campuses and elsewhere on the street, those who are opposed to this are today saying, not in our name. And they are support the Palestinians, and they see Zionism as a problematic. They see it as endangering the livelihood of all Jews. So that's a debate that is now tipping in favor of Judaism being as an identity or religious belief more so than a political identity. In Palestine, you have a struggle between, when we look at the Zionist state, you have a struggle between Zionism as a religious entity, and that is sort of centered in the West Bank, and the secular Jews, those who are sort of a liberal kind of an approach. So the point is that you have all these changes that are happening in international because of the impact of Gaza. And those who are saying, to get back to your question earlier, Karim, the idea that this Jewishness is no longer looked at as all Jews are being anti-Palestine, or all Jews have some affiliation of Israel, that has been challenged because of what we see in Gaza. And when you have, the very first demonstration when this happened back in October, one of the very early demonstrations who took actually, who were happening in Congress, in the capital, they were led by Jews. So it's ironic. It's amazing how the shift in American politics and the Jewish identity.
Understood, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our special coverage. So, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Professor, Dean Professor of International Education at California State University. You were live with us from California. Thank you so much. And Mr. Khan-O'Keefe, author, human rights activist, you were live with us from London. Thank you so much for all these insights. And thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on our channel. Until next time, take care.